During the Constitutional Convention in 1787, there was originally a proposal that was gaining some momentum that would have allowed for a sitting president to be removed for maladministration. James Madison objected to this approach and suggested instead the standard using high crimes and misdemeanors as the benchmark for determining impeachability and removability. This serves as a contrast to show that it's not just a simple question of a president not doing his job right. It's not just a question of mismanagement or maladministration. This has to be an offense against the body politic, against the United States themselves, a type of abuse of power that's so significant that it could be put into this category of affirmative malfeasance. The existence of the impeachment and removal power is itself a good example of what the Founding Fathers feared. They didn't want to have any system of government even remotely resembling the monarchy, and yet they understood that it was important for us to have a chief executive, and so they made clear that, number one, we would have an elected chief executive, not one that would occupy that position for life or by virtue of his or her birth. Number two, they made the election of that president indirect rather than direct. Number three, in addition to specifying that the term of office would be no longer than 4 years at a time, that even during that 4-year term of office, any president could be impeached and removed by the legislative branch. While there have been a number of federal officials impeached and removed from office, there have been only 4 sitting presidents of the United States who have been impeached: President Johnson, President Nixon, President Clinton, and President Trump. There have been only 3 instances in U.S. history where a sitting president, having been impeached, was subject to an impeachment trial in the Senate. President Nixon never had an impeachment trial in the Senate because he resigned from office and stepped down before the process had even been completed in the House of Representatives. So in each of these other instances where there was a trial held in the Senate for a sitting president, the Chief Justice of the United States came into the United States Senate and presided over that trial. In the case of President Johnson, and in the case of President Clinton, and in the case of President Trump, the impeachment did not result in removal from office. In none of those instances did the Senate believe that the extraordinary step of removing a sitting incumbent president from office was necessary or appropriate. By all historical accounts that I'm aware of, the whole reason why President Nixon never proceeded with the process allowing for the impeachment to run its course in the House of Representatives and then be kicked over to the Senate for a trial had to do with the fact that President Nixon didn't have the votes. He anticipated not only being impeached by the House, but also that he wouldn't have the necessary votes in order to block a 2/3 supermajority from removing him from office in a Senate impeachment trial. When the Senate tries an impeachment, we have lawyers brought in for both the prosecution and the defense. The prosecution consists of a body of what they call House managers, or members of the House of Representatives who have been appointed as prosecutors of the impeachment process. And then the person being impeached also has counsel, defense counsel. In the case of a sitting president, we'll sometimes refer to them as the defense legal team, the president's legal defense team. Both sets of lawyers will make arguments and introduce evidence about what may consist of the high crime or misdemeanor in question. And both sets of lawyers will submit legal briefing in writing to the senators and also make arguments, live arguments in front of the senators about what should be or should not be considered a high crime and misdemeanor. Some have asked the question, does an impeachment thus become a purely political process? At least insofar as we're talking about a proposed impeachment and removal of a sitting president of the United States, the process itself sort of keeps it from becoming political. So far in American history, because it's a very high standard to meet, you can't impeach a sitting president of the United States and be able to remove that president unless you have a 2/3 supermajority vote in the Senate. Now, typically, you're not going to see a sitting president impeached at all if the president's own party controls the House of Representatives. And that's one reason why you see presidents getting impeached is it happens typically when the party that is not the president's own party controls a majority of the votes in the House of Representatives. But even where that's the case, it still doesn't become a purely political exercise for the simple reason that it takes 2/3 of the Senate to vote for it. And typically in this country, the margins are much closer than that, such that you can't even get close to removing a president of the United States without pretty broad-based bipartisan support. In fact, the first time that you ever had a U.S. senator of the president's own political party in an impeachment trial of a sitting president in the United States Senate, voting to remove that president was in the case of President Trump. Senator Romney's vote against President Trump in favor of convicting President Trump was itself an historically unprecedented move. I've now had the opportunity to review this part of the Constitution, not only as a lifelong student of the Constitution, somebody who finds this stuff interesting, but also as a senator who sat through the impeachment trial of President Trump. As a member of the U.S. Senate, I was required to take an oath at the outset of that trial to do impartial justice. This, as I understood it, required me to review the arguments and the evidence, the facts and the law as presented to us in order to make a sound decision as required by the Constitution. This made clear to me that it's not a simple partisan exercise, and it's more than the simple requirement for a simple majority vote in the House of Representatives to impeach, or a 2/3 supermajority vote required in the Senate as a condition for removing a president. It's also accompanied by a very deliberately crafted standard intended by the Founding Fathers to be a rigorous one. You can't remove a president simply because you don't like the president's policies or because you don't think the president has done a particularly good job. It has to be something very serious, falling into the high crime and misdemeanor category. This is how the system was supposed to work, and it's supposed to be difficult to remove the president. I find it encouraging that members of the United States Senate, regardless of their political party, and for that matter, regardless of how they end up voting in any particular impeachment trial, do, generally speaking, genuinely try to reach what they consider the right result, and not just the result that they consider most politically expedient under the circumstances. Thank you for joining me for another episode of the Constitution Line by Line. Today we've covered Article 1, Section 3. Please join us next time.